Okay, I think everyone's here. We'll get started. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's doing okay. I think everyone's probably got quite advanced panel fatigue at this point. My ears have certainly stopped working. So we'll try and keep this fairly conversational and fairly flowing. I think we've got a great group of campaigners, some of what I see as the best people in the world on this topic. We've got science, we've got representation of philanthropy, we've got youth representatives from 2 different oceans. And I think on this topic, this is really an inflection point for deep sea mining. It feels like we go one step forward, and we were very heartened by our own government's U-turn on this position. We were very heartened by Mexico's movement in support of a moratorium. But then, things also move backwards in the same breath, and recent developments in Norway are alarming, quite shocking. So I wanted to start with Sian right at the other end. and start off really getting a picture of the state of play at the International Seabed Authority, momentum towards a moratorium, and how she sees things playing out from this moment forward. I'll pass you the mic all the way down.
Thanks, Dan, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. I know it's hard to get through security at this time of day, so really appreciate the full room. You have a couple of other experts on the ISA on the panel as well. Daniel and Khadija also spend a lot of time in Kingston. What is the status at the International Seabed Authority? We are coming into a critical year in 2024. And just to cast back for a moment, 18 months ago, there was not a single government call for a moratorium at the ISA or anywhere else. And at the UN Ocean Conference in Lisbon in June 2022, Palau, Samoa, and Fiji stepped forward as the first 3 governments calling for a moratorium. So I think it's really important, as we fast forward to congratulating the United Kingdom and Mexico to be the latest 2 countries coming into the call, bringing the total up to 24. It's really important to notice how that momentum has built over the last 18 months. And the discussion within the halls of the ISA has changed radically over that time. So for the first time at the Assembly meeting in July this year, the question of protection of the deep sea environment, the question of a recess, effectively a pause on deep seabed mining, was put on the floor of the plenary for the first time ever. And increasingly, these discussions around a moratorium are coming up in every part of the agenda of the meetings of both the Council and the Assembly of the ISA. So we're really seeing a ramping up of this topic within the discussions, within the formal negotiations. So that's important. However, you're right, Dan, it's still a big hill. It's still a steep hill to climb. What is coming up this year are some really important discussions in both Council and in the Assembly. In the Assembly, we're looking at a discussion around a general policy, which is the route, the mechanism that is going to be needed to achieve a moratorium. And the International Seabed Authority, just to remind everyone, that is the only place that we can realize a moratorium on this. So although the UN Ocean Conference, although the climate discussions, the Convention on Biological Diversity, these are all also important places to be having this discussion. If we don't land a moratorium at the ISA with the member states there, then it's not going to happen. And the last thing I'll say on that topic is, additionally, even as the momentum is building, we still have the 2-year loophole, which remains open. So that is a concern, because that means that any country can apply for a mining license, whether or not the mining code is adopted. And the metals company has indicated that it will submit a license for exploitation this August. So that is a real and present danger coming up.
Thanks, Sean. I don't know if we could get another mic. It's sort of quite hard having a conversation with. Oh, okay, no worries. You get that one in play, Daniel. Yeah, Daniel, we've been talking for years about this topic, and I've always been so impressed by your voice in this space and what you bring and the energy you're bringing, and I think that's super important. So your perspective on the ISA would be really valuable. I mean, do you see it as an institution that's fit for purpose to carry out its task at hand?
Well, I think when we are youth, we're usually born into a world where things are already set up in a way, and they usually tell us you have to respect the forms, you have to respect the way things are. And I think that's mainly what youth bring to the table, which is not only content, but idea, thinking outside the box, determination for vision in a way. So we do think that we see the International Seabed Authority as something that should be completely different of what it is right now. We need an institution that really focuses on research and promoting science around the deep sea. So I think just focusing directly and giving so much attention to deep sea mining in a way, it's really not the vision that we see for the International Seabed Authority in what we like in the future. In that route, I don't know if we're going to have a second question after this, right?
We'll have many questions.
Okay, great, for this, so I can touch on many different topics. There are also not a lot of countries that haven't ratified UNCLOS in a way, so they are not part of the International Seabed Authority. For example, we have Peru, Colombia. I am from Peru, so we haven't ratified UNCLOS, so we don't really directly have a voice in the International Seabed Authority. I've been the sole Peruvian representative in the ISA for the past 5 meetings that I was there. We've been trying to get a delegation to go there. We've even guaranteed that we can get them the funding to go there. And we're trying to get countries in our region to also be present there to make a voice. For example, Colombia now. We know Colombia has an embassy in Jamaica. So we do think that the ISA just is not really also being representative in countries like mine that haven't ratified UNCLOS and are not planning to ratify it anytime soon, and that will be affected by it. Peru has a boiling current with low oxygen, that any type of potential impact that might have. The first DISCOL experiment, which is the disturbed colonization experiment on deep sea mining, was done in front of Peru. And after more than 50 years, when they came back, and they have not seen any return of biodiversity, just nematodes. That was still there when they did the mining in there.
And that was 50 years ago.
Yeah, so we think that countries that haven't ratified UNCLOS, they need a voice also in the International Seabed Authority in their presence there. At the last meeting that we had, we saw the absence of so many countries. So we do think we need a new vision of what the International Seabed Authority should be, and that's what we eventually plan on the long term.
Thanks so much, Daniel. One of the most frustrating parts of this whole conversation is the conflation of deep sea mining with net zero and its portrayal as some kind of clean alternative. Tony, I wondered if you wanted to touch on that topic and the way in which mining's being used, and the sort of tactics being deployed.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name's Tony Worby, and I'm with Minderoo Foundation. And we're in a slightly unique position because the chairman of Minderoo Foundation is also the Fortescue Metals chairman. And so Andrew has established a mining company and is a major exporter of iron ore from Australia. He's also committed his company to decarbonising their entire operation by 2030, with massive investments in renewables, massive investments in green hydrogen, and as we've learnt this week, also pushing to decarbonise their shipping operations as well. And so when we started on this journey as a foundation of talking about the challenges of deep sea mining, I asked Andrew and I asked his company, you're committed to decarbonising your operations. Can you tell me whether or not you're going to need metals from the deep sea in order to achieve that? Because what we constantly hear, and it's a line that you've just alluded to, Dan, is that in order to decarbonise the economy, the only place we can go for the rare earths and the metals that we need is the deep sea. So we tested that with a company that is committed to decarbonising their operations, a major global company, a $60, $80 billion company. And they did the assessment and they came back and said, not only do we not need minerals from the deep sea to decarbonise, nobody does, okay? You look at manganese. There's no shortage of manganese from land-based mining operations. You look at nickel. Yep, there have been some supply shocks over time, but there is no shortage. In fact, the demand for nickel is still less than 10% of the supply from land-based mining. You look at cobalt, there's risks of concentrated supply, but you can diversify your supply chains, and smart organisations that need those rare earths, those metals can. And so they're just, you know, this line that, you know, in order to go green, we have to dig up the deep sea is just, there's no truth to it. There's no substance to it. But it's so easy to repeat. And the first time you hear it, you think, oh, wow, that makes sense. And, you know, for people who, you know, aren't close to it, they just accept that because it sounds so plausible. But it's, let's be honest, it's bollocks, right? Let's just call it for what it is. It's bollocks.
Good. I'm glad we've had a swear word. Okay, let's keep that momentum up. Yeah, good solid swear word there. Yeah, and you know, there's other aspects of I guess kind of patent greenwashing in the communications. You know, I don't, from my perspective, I'm no sort of economist, but I don't see how deep sea mining is going to displace a single meter of terrestrial mining. And I don't, you know, I know there's a million things wrong with terrestrial mining on a social and environmental level, but I don't see that deep sea is going to stop any of that. Deep sea mining is going to stop any of that at all. Khadija, you've been a voice in this space. I've been watching your work for years and years, and you know, as Sian said, you've also spent a lot of time at the ISA. What's your perspective? And it would also be really interesting to hear from a regional basis how you see progress on this topic. Is it on the government's agenda? You know, where are things from the way you see it?
Yeah, so I remember the first time I learned about deep sea mining was actually last year in Lisbon because of Sustainable Ocean Alliance. And I was like, this topic is interesting. You know, what is this about, etc. Where are these decisions being made? And then it was like, oh, well, the International Seabed Authority is in Jamaica. And I'm like, which Jamaica? The Jamaica in the Caribbean? Could never be, because I am from Trinidad and I've never heard about this. You know, I know UNESCO's office is there, UNEP office is there. I'm like, are you sure? And they were all like, yes, it is in Jamaica, etc. And I'm like, how is this decision being made in a region that I live and so much other young activists live, and we know nothing about it? So I was like, you know what? I need to pay attention. I need to get this on the radar because this is a very serious issue. And, you know, being from the Caribbean, the ocean has a very dark representation for a lot of us. It was a place where a lot of slaves died. You know, we don't have that cultural connection like the Pacific. And now we're in a state where we finally able to try and break that and try to build a cultural connection to the ocean, but it's already being taken away because of pollution, because of ocean acidification, because of sargassum and all these other different issues. And now they want to go and add deep sea mining to it. And a lot of the times, like the governments in the region, just 2 days ago, Daniel and I were on a panel speaking to somebody who is working within the Caribbean and Latin America. And the first thing he said was, well, Khadija, this is not happening in the Caribbean, so why should any Caribbean government care? Like, why should we put this on our radar? And I was just like, that does not make any sense. Are you going to wait until it become our problem to then act? No, you need to act before. You need to be proactive. Like, we have very limited representation in the room. We have Trinidad and Jamaica, and they're both part of the council, and they're kind of very much pro-mining. And it's just like, guys, we're already dealing with so much other issues. And, you know, they say with the sediment plumes and how that has the potential to change the chemistry of the ocean, like with sargassum in the region, that is because of the changes in the chemical composition of the ocean, whether it be from runoff from the river in Brazil, as well as increased iron from the Sahara Desert. Like, that changed the chemical composition. And that is why now we have sargassum that is like literally chest high on our beaches, destroying the tourism economy, etc. And it's just like, well, we see what chemical changes can do. And this has the potential to do the same thing. And even though it's happening, it might not be happening directly in our region. It is one ocean. Everything is connected. And we could see how far-reaching the effects could be. And this is why now more than ever, we definitely need more Caribbean representation in the room to really push against it and understand that this is not part of the sustainable blue economy, which is what they've been fed. So like we've been trying to debunk this and trying to get them to understand that you need to be there, you need to be present, you need to speak up, and we need to protect the ocean for future generations so that we could be able to build that cultural connection that we were once robbed of.
And what do you need to build that voice, to build that collective momentum? What would be helpful?
I need strength, I need patience, I need I need listening ears, I need all these different things. But I think one of the biggest things that especially we as youth need more than anything else is the knowledge and the capacity. And that was one of the reasons why in July I organized a Deep Sea Youth Symposium to get youth from the Caribbean to be in Jamaica, to be at the ISA, to understand the policy, to understand the science, to understand all the different aspects, the moving parts of the discussion, especially the International Seabed Authority. Like I've been going now for, like Daniel said, the past 5 sessions, and every time I join a panel or I join something on the International Seabed Authority or the ISA, I learn something brand new, and I'm like, when am I going to have enough knowledge to be able to go out there and like really be a pro or professional? Like there's so many different moving parts, but I really feel like we just need as much information as possible so that we could gather movement and we could continue to push our governments to be present and to move more than anything else. And well, of course we always need funding, right? Everybody needs funding to be able to do these things. But for the most part, I really believe knowledge is power. And if we could get more youth informed, because like I said, I'm a very big like ocean and climate specialist, activist working in this space, and I had no clue that this was in my region and this decision was being made here. And it was like, well, what legacy would that leave on the region? You know, do we want the Caribbean to remember as a place where deep sea mining, was green lighted? No, we don't want that. So it's about getting more of us informed and really pushing that message out there that a moratorium is the best way forward.
Awesome. Thank you. John, I've always been impressed by Planet Tracker's ability to go very deep on this stuff. And I see François as a great voice in this. You know, I was so impressed when The Economist published literally a piece of greenwash. I mean, could have been a metals company press release. His response was the response to the editor was so robust and so punchy. So I've been very closely following your work ever since. And I'm delighted by it. I know you've recently done some work on the climate implications of this topic, and it would be great to get your perspective on that, given the fact we're at the UNFCCC, and any comments you have on actually the companies operating in this space, and their, you know, are they sound financial operations? Is there investment risk attached to them? You know, any thoughts you have on those sort of topics would be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. I was going to say you've got second best. I'm the head of research, and François, who you just mentioned, leads our ocean program. I don't think I can say second best. So I think I brought down your average of expertise. Let me be upfront about that. But thank you for your kind words. So I work for Planet Tracker. We're a not-for-profit. And one of our programs is to look at the oceans, of which we look at deep sea mining. And we literally published yesterday, and maybe the title will give you a bit of a clue as to our thoughts. It's called The Climate Myth of Deep Sea Mining. So what we're attempting to do is compare and try and deal with this issue about, are the oceans an attractive place to go from a climate perspective, as Tony was mentioning there, or should we be sticking with terrestrial mining? the sort of short version is sort of we've looked at the life cycle from the sort of nodule to the commodity, if you like. We point out factors, and thank you for mentioning about which ones are sponsored by deep sea mining companies. I think you need to be aware of that. I think that's important. And how the results vary. It's all in the report. It's on an open access basis on our website, and it's planet-tracker.org. If you go to Planet Tracker, you'll end up looking at the planets, literally, and doing that. But the interesting thing is, the summary is, and you might go, well, this is really disappointing. Based on these reports, adopting a deep sea sort of nodule mining approach, the answers range from either being 20%, 28% higher or 76% lower. In other words, you go, well, that's not helpful at all. So you need to look at the details in the particular papers, and then you start to understand why there are these differences. So we're not too subtle about it. Some of the papers which were sponsored just omit parts of the process to make terrestrial mining. I'm not being very diplomatic here. I hope that's okay. To make it look to make it look better. And then I think some of the more robust studies say actually a 25% difference in your sort of climate expectation actually should be expected. And they point out things like, it depends what software you use. It depends what data you use. We're not inundated with data. We could do with more of it, quite frankly. So you start to see the results vary all over the place. The warning that I would give here is when you break it down from a climate point of view, where is the harm coming from? It's the processing. It's about 70%. So before you get to whether it's the deep sea or whether it's terrestrial, that's what you need to deal with. And that's where people start to manipulate the results. So if I go for a low carbon grid, then you know what? The climate impact is less. That's where the main focus should be. So whether you're not going to be processing on the ocean, it's coming back to the land. So just remember, it's about 3/4 is based in that area. Now, the one warning I want to give is we do not give any investment advice whatsoever. So I just want to say that up front. We have looked at some of these companies and, well, they don't make muster. But I have to say that's quite a danger. I was discussing this with Tony beforehand. And the issue is that we speak to financial institutions. That's our main market. And some of them think that economically it's so ridiculous, it will never happen. So they say, I don't know why you're spending time. I would like to have that confidence. I mean, some absurd economic models are followed, but they do think it's absurd. So to give you an idea on how absurd it is, we, in a previous paper, looked at the companies are arguing they're going to restore the seabed. Okay, let's have a look at the costs of that. Now, we could be well out. We give all our methodology, so you can have a go at us. It's absolutely fine. But if they just restored about 30% of the concessions that they're talking about, it would be greater than the global defense budget. Okay, now you can say, well, you're well out. Okay, well, go for half of that. There is no way that can be financed. And when you look at the terrestrial mines, what you find is that you find in Canada, there's 10,000 abandoned mines. They're not restored. Australia has about 60,000, and the US has 161,000. They don't get restored. So let's not pretend. I'll better stop there before I get too excited.
No, that's great. I mean, I'd love to think that the absurdity of it would preclude it happening, but, you know, we live in an absurd world, don't we? Look at subsidies. But Daniel and Sian, like, your points earlier on, I think, around capacity and the ability for a number of countries, they simply just don't have the economic resources to attend the ISA. I mean, and that's something that we at Blue Marine Foundation have been thinking about for a while. How much of a problem is that? I mean, it feels like these conversations are just happening in some cases even in countries' backyards, that they know nothing about and are not participating in it. Do you think that's still a live issue at the ISA? Is that sort of picture getting better?
It is absolutely a live issue at the ISA. I mean, I don't think that quorum has ever been established in assembly. So there are 167 member countries of the ISA, and so you need at least half of them to have quorum in the room, which is, quick math, 74. And 74, is that right? Somewhere?
I think so.
Yes. And we've never had over 70, in fact, and the numbers went down. So it was 50-something countries that were present in the room at the last assembly meeting. This is really important, especially as this discussion heats up. Why? In part because, as you say, many of the countries have overstretched budgets, overstretched capacity on staff, right? More and more, we have more and more of these convention meetings, these conferences and in some countries, one person will hold the file for climate and biodiversity and seabed mining. And for a long time at the ISA, the only countries that showed up to the meetings were the ones that had a stake in the game. So to your question to Daniel earlier on, is the ISA a body that is capable of managing this? I would say partly the answer in part is no, because of the pro-mining bias that is built in under the Convention on the Law of the Sea into the body, into the decision-making structures, which in turn feeds through to who's in the room for these discussions over time. So there's a real issue about attendance, about representation. And that goes to both the pro-mining bias of the decision-making processes and the nature of the debate on the floor. There has been a real push in the last year because this discussion about a momentum is really picking up speed. There have been encouraging signs, but it's also, as Khadija rightly notes, it's also about awareness. So the ISA file has been, it depends which ministry that's been held in, who's having those discussions. And increasingly, some of the work that our member organizations are doing, because the DSCC is a coalition of 117 member organizations, many of which are working on this around the world. And our members are working increasingly in capital, bringing the environment ministries to the table, bringing the other voices into the room. And that's critical. And just to something else Khadija said, this is an issue that we can stop, right? This has not started yet. We, as the environmental community, have for years been pushing back on stopping things that have already been begun, on restoring the damage that has been caused. Nothing has happened yet. We have the opportunity to stop this in its tracks and to learn from where we've made mistakes in the past.
And how much of that pro-mining bias is a function of the existing secretariat, and how much is it built in?
It is absolutely built into the setup of the International Seabed Authority under the 1994 agreement. So there's all sorts of aspects to the voting structure, to the way that the governing bodies are set up, so it's absolutely built in. There's lack of transparency that's built in. So there's a number of structural issues. On top of that, certainly the culture at the ISA over the last 2 decades has very much been pro-mining, and that has in turn informed how the Secretariat has been staffed, how it has been governed. It's both.
Khadija, you've been at the last 5 sessions. Do you want to add to that at all? Do you have any perspective you want to share on that?
Well, just 2 days ago, I was walking by in the green zone, and I just remember hearing manganese, cobalt, nickel, and something about the metals that were being said and the order that they were being called in. Like it caught my ear, and I just looked up, and on the screen was Michael Lodge at the Saudi Arabia building, and talking about, yes, we need deep sea mining to drive the green revolution, etc. And I was just like, here he goes again, and everything else. And that just really goes to show like how much of a pro-mining stance that the Secretary General has, and how much that is pushed. And we see where certain decisions come up, and like they actively try to block, you know, how to move forward with a moratorium or to even have conversations around the moratorium. And you just see some of the different states in the room also get frustrated by some of these blocks that come up. And it's just like, well, you as a state, you know, you as a council member, like you have the power, like speak up, call it out, like call out these injustices, like use UNCLOS to your advantage, like it's there, it's in the law, you can use it, and it's time for us especially to try and help and empower states to really use that so that we could see this moratorium come forward, because as right now, like I mentioned, he is out there preaching to the masses, let's do this. So we need to also have our voices there contributing to that narrative of let's not, because it's definitely not needed. And I mean, adding to that, we really need to see a reform of the ISA. It's now more than ever, because like we have too many problems. Everything is a problem, and we don't need to add anything else, because we don't have the resources, we don't have the money, we don't have the capacity, we don't have the mental strength, the emotional strength, anything else to deal with a next issue and to try and fight to solve it before it starts.
Yeah, I totally agree. We've already seen kind of quite profound economic implications for some of the countries that have been engaged in the early momentum of this nascent industry. You know, I can't remember the exact figures, but was it Papua New Guinea were left with like $157 million hole? There's so much understanding that economic resources are needed by those countries. I mean, Tony, I wanted to come to you quickly just to talk about some of the more developed nations and their, I guess, the complete disharmony between some of their environmental policies and initiatives and the lack of responsibility they're showing on this topic. Sorry, a bit of a thorny one.
Sure. So if we start with some of the developing countries, you know, I don't know any country that would willingly do vast environmental damage purely for economic return, right? There's plenty of examples of it historically, but I don't believe some of the countries in the Pacific Islands, for example, who are pro-deep sea mining, really truly want to go and dig up the deep sea. What they're looking for is economic opportunity. And my biggest fear is that this will go the same way as a lot of licensing of fishing rights, for example, where if you don't have the resources to derive economic benefit from the assets within your exclusive economic zone, you license it, and foreign fleets come in. Quite often they don't even land that catch in your country. They throw you a couple of bucks and they take off, and you're left with the damage and very little of the income. We've seen that happen over and over again with fisheries, and you know we're going to see that with deep sea mining as well, right? And so I think that's the first challenge that we've got to overcome, which is to, you know, have alternative investments in sustainable blue economy and into those economies that don't do that level of environmental damage. The other end of the spectrum, you've got, you know, Norway coming out yesterday with a very pro-deep sea mining stance, and I have to say, I'm angry about that. I don't have panel fatigue this morning. I'm angry, you know, and this is my last day at COP, and I'm getting on a plane tonight angry. And not just about the deep sea mining announcement yesterday, but a bunch of things that have been said this week. You know, my chairman is very fond of saying, to get us through this climate crisis, you know, we don't need more capital. There's plenty of capital out there. We don't need more technology. There's plenty of technology out there. It's still evolving, absolutely. What we're lacking is character. The resource that is lacking to solve the problems that we're grappling with is character of leadership. And until our politicians show that character, until our business leaders and industrial leaders show that character, we're never going to push through and get the regulatory environment that we require, the changes to legislation, the changes to policy, because once you put those in place, then then innovation comes in behind, right? You know, if you said, we're not going to mine the deep sea, but on the off chance that we need those minerals down the track, you're going to have to figure out a different way. Well, guess what? We're smart, right? Humans are smart, supposedly. But, you know, we are capable of innovating and finding alternatives. And, you know, there's massive investment going into sodium-ion batteries, for example. Right now, we can do a vastly better job of circularizing the minerals that are in the system. That just requires a policy intervention to say, you know, you need to price it properly, you need to put the proper regulations in place. So we're more than capable of solving this crisis, but we need our leaders to step up. And if I can just say, because I'm not being diplomatic today, because I am angry and because I am leaving tonight, you know, Norway's, like, it's hypocritical, right? This is a country that is pushing a sustainable ocean plan, you know, who is leading the high-level panel. And you cannot say to me that a decision to go and mine the deep sea, the biggest habitat on Earth, the least understood, the biggest stores of carbon globally, no assessment of the biological, you know, the impacts on biological diversity or ecosystems, like, I'm speechless as well as angry.
Thanks, Tony.
So I'm not leaving. So I'm going to be just.
No, you don't have to be diplomatic.
I just want to say one thing because I think it's really important. That I'm at the paranoid end, and I mentioned to you before that financially it just doesn't make any sense at all. And I used to be a financial analyst, and I went through with colleagues, and you think what you're missing, and you're not missing anything. But what I am worried about in the Norway announcement is a sort of new message. And I just noticed that they sort of threw in that deep sea mining, and maybe colleagues have heard this before, I haven't, maybe my ignorance, that they're suggesting that it helps in the transition from the oil and gas industry. So I'm going to move jobs from the oil and gas industry now into deep sea mining. And I'm worried about that messaging.
Yeah. Does anyone want to build on that? I've got absolutely no idea how long we've got left.
20 minutes.
Okay. You add.
Yeah, I could add to that narrative because when I spoke to some of the representatives at Trinidad and Tobago, and I don't know if you all know, but Trinidad is very much a fossil fuel industry, right? And I asked them, you know, like, why aren't we more active in the pro-moratorium stance, etc.? And they were just like, well, this is an opportunity for us to save our oil and gas industry. And I was like, what do you mean? And they were like, well, it should basically use some of the same equipment. We have the machinery, we have the knowledge, like we've been extracting oil for a very long time. So this could be a good way for us to shift. So maybe we keep our eyes open on the potential that this is something that we could get into, especially since now more than ever, there's the call for us to move towards a just transition and to move away from fossil fuels. And they were like, well, this is our bread and butter. This is how we make money. So if we get rid of it, then education is no longer free, healthcare is no longer free, all these other things is no longer free. So we need to make sure that we have a way to make money. And I was like, well, this is not it. I was like, everybody could tell you that you speak to the scientists, everybody against the industry would say, like, the maths is not mathsing. Like, you're not going to make money or the money that you're currently making from the oil and gas industry in this. And it's really time for us to move away from the oil and gas industry, etc. But they are not interested in hearing it, and I don't know how much times we could try and debunk it as much as possible, but in their minds, and I really don't know who is feeding them this information, that is what I've been trying to do, because this is not just the position of Trinidad. I mean, yes, we are the biggest, fossil fuel economy in the region, but a lot of the other islands are being told that this is something that they could get rich out of, and I'm really trying to understand that. And this is part of the sustainable blue economy. Like, that is the messaging that is being thrown at them. And the idea is for us to really go in there and debunk that as much as possible and really try to get people in there to show that you would lose. And we have the example of Papua New Guinea, and yeah, I really need them to understand that.
Yeah, I mean, building on Tony's first swear word earlier on, I'll go a little further and just say it's just such bullshit, isn't it?
Wow, this is getting good, isn't it?
We'll keep ramping it up. I'm not sure how far we can go. I don't want to upset Rama.
Can I add to that, Dan? Because I made some analogies with the fishing industry previously. I've got close friends who are fishermen who are doing their absolute best within their industry to sustainably manage their fish stocks. And by and large, Australia's fisheries are pretty well managed. But we have a fundamental difference of opinion on the value of marine parks. These are good people, right? The fishermen that I know who fish sustainably are good people. But they really hate the idea of marine parks. And their argument to me is, but if we fish sustainably everywhere, Tony, you don't need marine parks. And my response to that is, show me one place in the world where we fish sustainably. Where every fishing boat, every company goes in there and, really, especially on the high seas. The high seas is just, ultimate tragedy of the commons when it comes to fisheries, obviously, and we hope the high seas treaty that's coming will help address that. But, we have to protect nature in critical areas. And the way I try and really talk about marine parks now is think of it as a critical part of fisheries infrastructure. You can't have a fishing industry without a ship. You can't have a fishing industry without a port and a processing facility. And actually, you can't have it without a no-take marine park around the most valuable, ecologically sensitive habitat areas that ultimately are providing nurseries for the very start of the supply chain of your industry. And move away from this false paradigm of conservation versus extraction, because you can't have one without the other sustainably in the long term. And I think coming back to the deep sea, it's exactly the same situation. Like, there's these unbelievable ecosystems that take millennia to establish. And, I've got a colleague who does a lot of submersible work, and he was down in a submersible and he saw the scar from a large World War II vessel that was sunk up near Sunder Strait, just north of Australia. And it's hundreds and hundreds of metres deep, thousands of metres deep, I think. And he said it looks like it happened yesterday. Like, this ship went down and put this massive scar in the seafloor on a ridge. He's like, nothing's recovered in 70, 80 years since that happened, because these ecosystems take so long to establish. And we still don't understand just how valuable those ecosystems are. We still don't understand the links between the surface waters and the deep ocean, and how that life on the seafloor ultimately is helping, all of us on land. It's one integrated system, and the damage that we could do from deep sea mining to vast areas of the ocean without having a clue what the consequence is for marine life or for life on land. It's just like, at some point the precautionary principle has to apply. And especially when there's no need for the extraction and for the damage that would be done. So it's so senseless. And I think, to your point, Khadija, we just have to keep, there's nothing sustainable about it. There is no place in a sustainable ocean plan for this kind of activity. And we've just got to keep hammering that message.
I don't know, Dan, if you wanted to open the floor up for questions. I wanted to pick up on actually a couple of points that have been made, and to tie this together, because and Tony, as the chief scientist of Minderoo, you're a strong voice on this as well. We keep coming back to the science of this, and we hosted a panel at the Pacific Moana Blue Pavilion yesterday morning that featured Sarah and Lisa, two of our deep deep sea biologists, deep sea scientists at the back of the room. The Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative has a tremendous amount of expertise on what's happening in the deep sea and the potential impacts. Yes, there's a lot more that we need to know. Yes, there are massive gaps in our scientific understanding of the deep ocean, which will take decades to fill, right? Which is one of the reasons for a moratorium, because we don't know nearly enough about our deep ocean before we go and destroy it. But we also do know a lot. We know a lot about the carbon pump, about the role that the ocean does play in carbon sequestration and protecting us from the worst impacts of climate change. The deep ocean is one of our biggest allies in climate change, which is a line that we've heard this week a lot in the context of ocean carbon dioxide removal, which is another big up-and-coming scary threat to the deep ocean, but not the topic of this panel. The next one, right? But just to say that one of the things that we very much need is a new deep ocean science agenda that really convenes scientific expertise and other partnerships around the world. Tony, you say, or Andrew says, that there's enough money out there. Some of that money needs to go into deep ocean science, and that science needs to be driven by the countries themselves. It needs to be driven by the island states. It needs to be driven by the Caribbean, by the other regions, which are at the front line of climate change and at the front line of the destruction that is taking place in the ocean. And that, I think, goes as well to a comment that you made at the beginning, Daniel. In terms of reform of the ISA, what would be the vision of this UN-affiliated institution that was created under the law of the sea? If it's not there to mine, why not reform it to be a steward of ocean science, a steward for the deep ocean for the future? So there's a direction that we can go in politically. There's a direction that we need to go in scientifically, and we're all up here on this panel impatient, and we're all in this room at this conference impatient for that to move forward.
Yeah, the ISA is a steward for the global commons. Wonderful prospect.
It's got a dual mandate. Its mandate is to regulate the minerals on the deep seabed and to protect the environment for humankind. Yeah. So let's focus on that second part of its mandate.
Absolutely. Daniel, you wanted to come in there.
Yes, I think there are many points that were made, specifically about sustainable development, about humankind specifically in that way. And I think on the future, one of the things that we really need is that ecological concepts need to be understood overall. Ecological concepts need to be the baseline for everything. And something that we see along the line with negotiators everywhere is that they lack ecological concepts. They have no understanding of nature, and they're the ones making decisions. When we were in BB&J now in February, the Peruvian delegation was there. We had a meeting with Lisa there. No one from there was, they were all diplomats, and they were doing the negotiations, and they were saying that they were not going to sign BB&J Peru because this was a thing about sovereignty, not about biodiversity. And usually in all these spaces, these people speaking with very much arrogance about the deep sea ecosystems, about the decisions, have really no understanding of deep sea ecosystems or no understanding about basic ecological concepts. Not only there, but everywhere here, even at COP. And I think one of the things that we need to understand that ecological concepts is that, one, we're not a divine species. We're not glorified. There's not a divine being administrating and making sure species are going to extinct. And I think that's one of the things that we need to get out of the beliefs. And the reason I say this is because when the concept, for example, of extinction of a species happened around the 18th centuries, that it was in France when they first discovered the mammoth, most of the scientists back then were saying, like, well, this is a species that should probably be roaming around the wilderness. They cannot disappear. It will be the first species that has disappeared. Then they discovered the dinosaurs, and then the concept of extinction came. But in our region, the concept of extinction is still not understood. People in my region, for example, still don't believe that extinction can occur because they think there's a divine being that's going to make sure that species don't go to extinct eventually. And that has really made things that we ignore in ecological concepts. Ecological concepts, like, for example, 10,000 years ago, we were only 1 million human beings. In 1471, we were already 500 million human beings. In 1801, we reached 1 billion. We're 8 billion human beings now. Our species became a species around 300,000 years ago, but beforehand, around 800,000 years ago, during 200,000 years, our descendants, our ancestors, stayed under 5,000 individual populations. We're now 8 billion beings. And each one of these beings deserves a quality of life, deserves nutritious, deserves around 60 grams of protein a day, deserves technologies, deserves energy, but it's not going to be able to be done sustainable also in a way. So there's other ecological concepts like overpopulation that we don't want to discuss because we like ignoring overpopulation because we're thinking in fictional terms, like we're a divine being still. And the second thing is that we are an invasive species. We left Africa 70,000 years ago. Exotic and invasive species are an issue everywhere around the world, but we don't mention ourselves. We arrived in the Americas 12,000 years ago when there was already an ecosystem of 1 million years that was established, and we destroyed megafauna, 98% of the megafauna in 2,000 years with human beings. And that was even before the wheel got established and before even the systems and the mercantile system got established. So we need to see ourselves as part of the ecosystem when we have these discussions also, because sustainably, we cannot be speaking about sustainability in the future if we're ignoring ecological concepts.
I love it when you get on a roll. I do want to take this to the audience. I'm still no idea where we're going to go. Here we go.
Thank you very much. Very, very, how can I say, energetic discussion. My background is conservation organization WWF, but these 2 years I'm working for the TNFD task force on development. So my question is about corporate power, in a sense, virtually prohibit deep sea mining because at the end of the day, this is just a market. It's all commercial deal. So if there is no one company who do not want to make use of that kind of material from the deep sea mining, even whatever Norway says or whatever other government says, it's not possible to make the business. So how we can really raise, in a sense, corporate power to make things move in the right direction? How do you think of it?
Thank you. And you said you were from WWF? So WWF is actually one of the most active organizations in our coalition, right? And you're doing fantastic work along with a number of other civil society groups around the world, bringing this issue to the corporate table. So alongside the growth in the calls for moratorium from governments around the world, there's a business statement and a number of other places where both financial institutions and a number of other companies in the tech sector, in the automotive sector, growing number of companies, Google, Rivian, Volvo came out at the UN General Assembly just in September this year. So there is very much also a snowball effect taking place in the corporate world. Among other things, it goes back to that awareness raising, right? This issue, nobody was talking about it 2 years ago, and there's this tremendous momentum. We all need to, if anybody wants to know what you can do about this topic, talk about it, right? Talk about it, and as a consumer, as a voter, as a member of the world community. And I think that, among other things, is how corporates are going to come into the picture. Tony.
So supply chains is the other mechanism. I mentioned Fortescue at the beginning. Not only have they said that they won't use deep sea metals in their operations, they won't accept it in their supply chain at all. And there's now a statement on their website that says, we won't accept minerals from deep sea mining in our supply chain. They've been very effective, and Minderoo Foundation has also been very effective at writing into our contracts with all of our partners and service providers that we won't accept modern slavery. And we will go right back through the supply chain, and we've got organisations that we work with to identify any risk of modern slavery right back, not just with the people who we're doing business with, but the people they do business with and the people they do business with. Companies can do the same with deep sea metals. And so Sean's just mentioned a lot of companies that, are taking an active stance on this. There's obviously a role for consumers, but I think, we put a lot on consumers, to be honest. And it really is the corporate world, I think, that can step up into this space, as you suggested. But I do think integrity of supply chains is absolutely one mechanism.
Yeah, but I think, and huge shout out to WWF and Greenpeace and Andy Whitmore and all the people who've been in orchestrating this corporate response to deep sea mining. And it's really encouraging seeing people deeply embedded in the transition, like Northvolt, saying no. I guess I've also seen quite a disingenuous response from the financial services industry. Earlier this year, I sat around a table in a Swiss mountain village. You could possibly guess where it would be. And a bunch of CSOs, this is the magic of Davos. We can all agree unilaterally right now, we're not going to support deep sea mining. Okay, so can you come out and say that in public? Tumbleweed, And it's just, I think we need to be much more urgent in insisting that these financial institutions don't speculate on this industry because it's unsound economically. Sorry, other people in the audience?
Hi, thank you. I just want to share, I feel the frustration you have shared. I'm coming from Mozambique. I work for IUCN. I just joined IUCN and then the whole discussion on deep sea mining as well, despite the fact that I've been working for 7 years on environmental impact assessment as part of a consortium that is providing technical assistance to our government. And I see this is a beautiful panel, a beautiful discussion, but when it comes to turning this discussion into something that our governments can understand, it's a whole different thing. So from this 7 years working on environmental impact assessment and trying to put in place a mitigation hierarchy governance structure in Mozambique, because the third largest contribution for our GDP is the mining sector. So imagine the influence economically we have in the country and the way donors and the different international, I would say, influence we have in our country agenda. Because I feel like we need to argue, we need to bring the private sector, strengthen the voice of the different CSO organizations, but also, influence and build capacity to governments. And this takes time. It's not just a 2 years project. It's not just assistance here and there in workshops. It's sitting with them. They don't understand the EIA process. They can't deal with these companies because there is so much funding need in poor countries that this discussion has to come to a level where we go beyond ecological stuff to economy and find solutions with our governments. So I feel from the EIA experience that I have, sitting with the government, trying to understand an EIA, guys, it's so hard. Imagine the seabed mining discussion. It's a whole different world. So I think we need to invest a lot, especially when it comes to train, build capacity, stronger voices from the different CSOs, influence the financial sector. The money that flows to our government and to these projects has to follow social and environmental safeguards. So I think knowledge, as many of you said, knowledge, influence on private sector side, build long-term environmental impact assessment and capacity and science in the governments, in the countries is necessary. So we can actually have, down the road, potentially we are building, much stronger countries to actually be in the panel and discuss as some of you are doing already. So thanks for the great job, but we need to, downscale this discussion to the country levels. Thanks.
That's a very good point, and that's what we're trying to do in Latin America, for example. Well, Latin America is a very political place. It's a very easy to shift if we have the people on the basis. In Mexico, as you guys have seen, it has been the country that has changed the position. And this had all started when we had the Encuentros de Mares in Mexico. I don't know if you remember then. where we presented about deep sea mining, and we were with many different figures, and the chancellor was a problem in Mexico. And then one day Max Bello calls me and he's like, Daniel, they're changing the chancellor in Mexico. We have an opportunity. Alicia Bárcena is going in there. We called Mario Gomez, we called many different organizations. It's like, let's schedule a call with Alicia Bárcena. They went to meet with her. We got, with our SOA youth, we got over 125,000 signatures to be presented to the Mexican authorities. So that's why I think youth in that way, we are allies. Sometimes I think that we work independent as youth, but no, we're a key factor, we're a key ally to all the growing momentum campaign. So that's how we were able to get Mexico to change position, because specifically that. In Peru, for example, that's not in UNCLOS, I worked as an advisor with Veronica Mendoza, who became the first presidential candidate to announce a deep sea mining moratorium as a presidential priority on the first day of government. We didn't win the election, sadly. Now I worked as advisor in Congress with Congressman Malaga, where we presented the first deep sea mining moratorium bill in Latin America. It's still in Congress, hasn't been debated in commission yet, it's being shifted, but we have that. And we also went to the scientific committee in Chile, which is a committee of the future, where they're writing right now a bill also to ban deep sea mining on the first 200 kilometers. And in that point, we have reached the industry. Actually, that's what we were worried about first. Peru, more than 10% of its economy comes from fishing industry and mining companies. So when we went to the mining companies, we're like, do you want more? We had to go to their narrative. Do you want new copper activities to occur? Our main source of economy is copper. So how are we going to be able to reduce the copper competition? They don't want copper competition, so we had to go on that route. We went to the fishing industry. They have a huge amount of fishing vessels, and we're like, this is eventually might be affect the upwelling current. That's going to help them, and that's how we got them on board. So yes, we're speaking up right now. We want to get Argentina, who's a main country in Latin America that we need to get. So we need help with Argentina, and we want other landlocked-based countries in the region to also be present there.
Thanks, Daniel. I'm looking forward to when you lot take power. We're totally over time. There's wrap-it-up signals going off left, right, and centre. Thanks very much for coming. Thanks to all the panelists and the great questions.